Have you ever had a memory that turns out to be wrong, only to meet someone else who's had that exact same false memory? How can that be possible? Did someone change reality when you weren't looking, or did you accidentally jump into an alternate universe with small but noticeable differences? But unfortunately, no, that's not the case as far as we know. This phenomenon of collective misremembering is known as the Mandela effect, and if you know where to look, it's all around you. For instance, there's a chance that you have vivid memories of the 10 following events that, well, they never actually happened. Number 10. Nelson Mandela's prison death. The term Mandela effect was coined in 2010 when tons of people on the internet discovered that they had very clear memories of South Africa's anti-apartheid revolutionary Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s as a martyr to his cause. This was particularly weird because Mandela didn't actually die until 2013 and, in fact, famously served as the country's president from 1994 to 1999. A paranormal consultant called Fiona Broom coined the term Mandela effect based on this collective misremembering, and her explanation was that it was a malfunction in our memory, not unlike a glitch in computer software. Others preferred to think that this was a remaining effect of history being changed by time travelers, and even insinuated that the whole thing was caused by an interference from Satan and other dark spiritual forces. Psychologists, on the other hand, say that the phenomenon is a social version of confabulation, the unconscious manufacturing of misinterpreted or even completely fabricated memories that is relatively common in everyday life. Number 9. The turkey-eating portrait of King Henry VIII. What is the first image that comes to your mind when you think of King Henry VIII, Britain's favourite portly serial marriage enthusiast? Chances are that at least some of you are picturing the famous painting where he was eating a turkey leg and perhaps seated at a banquet table. There's just one problem: that picture is not real. There are plenty of homages to it in movies and in the printed media, even The Simpsons has referred to it. But an actual painting of this happening from his own era, it just doesn't exist. There are plenty of theories as to what could have triggered this particular false group memory. From the obligatory reality alteration ideas to an old black and white movie where the actor playing the king heartily devoured a fried chicken. One of the more reasonable theories is that it's our brain playing tricks on us. There's the legendary portrait by Hans Holbein the Younger, where the king holds a brown glove in one hand and his other hand hovers near an ornate dagger. It's easy to imagine a mischievous mind glancing at the picture of a reasonably well-fed man and interpreting either of these objects as a large drumstick. Number 8. Luke, I'm your father, is an iconic Star Wars quote that does not actually exist. Darth Vader's legendary line in The Empire Strikes Back is a plot twist to end all plot twists, and it remains one of the most iconic scenes in movie history. And the quote is,
"No, I am your father."
And you might be thinking at this point, well, Simon, you got it wrong because the quote's actually, Luke, I'm your father. But no, I'm not wrong. No, I am your father is the real line, despite the fact that it's far less impressive and gives way less context than the famously misremembered one. In fact, our brain's nasty tendency to remember famous quotes as quotably as possible has led to a whole bunch of famous quotes that were never spoken aloud in their actual movies and TV shows. The closest Captain Kirk ever got to beam me up Scotty in the original Star Trek series was Scotty, beam us up. Dirty Harry never utters the question, do you feel lucky, punk? And Hannibal Lecter doesn't actually say, hello, Clarice, at any point during Silence of the Lambs. Even Humphrey Bogart never says, play it again, Sam, in Casablanca, although Ingrid Bergman does say, play it, Sam, at one point. Bogart's actual quote in Casablanca is much longer and far less memorable. He says,
played it for her, you play it for me.
Well, I don't think I can remember.
If she can stand it, I can. Play it.
Number 7. The color chartreuse. Chartreuse is a shade between green and yellow that emerged in the late 19th century and experienced its heyday in the fashion of the Roaring Twenties. However, a lot of the internet lost their mind over the fact that chartreuse is actually a deep earthly red. Some seem to remember it as more of a pink or purple hue, but the red spectrum features prominently in these discussions. Many of these people say that they've unexpectedly and embarrassingly discovered the true color behind the name after starting a heated debate with someone and swearing blind that their red version of chartreuse is the right one. Given that it took its name from a green liquor, it's hard to determine what makes such a percentage of the population associate it with shades of maroon and pink. It's possible that the word chartreuse just sounds like it should be a hearty wine color, so that's where some people's brains get confused. Number 6. The Berensstein Bears are actually called the Berenstein Bears. Remember the Berenstain Bears children's books? Well, you don't, because they don't actually exist. The bears are, and have always been, called the Berenstain Bears. This seems like an easy misnomer in the same way that the brain might interpret the surname Morelos as the more common Morales. However, Mandela effect enthusiasts have taken this one-letter difference and used it to throw around theories about alternate time streams. While the Berenstain Bears are actually named after the authors, Stan and Jan Berenstain, some people have put forward the idea that there are actually multiple parallel realities, and the fact that the Bears' family spelling has suddenly turned from Berenstein to Berenstain means that we've abruptly jumped into a different one than we're used to being in. But this theory, of course, ignores the fact that the name is simply easy to misspell, and it's even appeared on some merchandise incorrectly. Number 5. What happened to the Tiananmen Square man? The Tiananmen Square massacre on June 4, 1989 was a tragic and powerful event, but the most enduring image of the day was one of non-violent resistance. A picture of a single man carrying a bag and fearlessly standing in front of a column of tanks. Unfortunately, the moment after the photo was taken, the tanks pressed forward and ended his moment in the limelight with a small and sad splat. Except that didn't happen. That's the Mandela effect at work again. There are many theories about the tank man's identity and his eventual fate, but no one involved in or present at the event says that he was run over, though unfortunately many others were less fortunate. On the contrary, he repeatedly moved to block the tank's way, and once the tank finally shut its engines, he actually climbed on it and had a brief conversation with the driver until bystanders or the secret police pulled him to safety. Despite all this, there are people who vividly remember that Tankman was run over and even claim that they saw footage of the incident. There are even congressional records where politicians seemingly refer to the man being run over. Number 4. Lucian Staniak, the serial killer who wasn't. If you Google Lucian Staniak, you'll find many articles about his horrible deeds. He was an infamous Polish serial killer known as the Red Spider, and his awful murders drew comparison to Jack the Ripper himself. There was even a movie made based on his murder spree in the 1960s. But despite all these people remembering the man and his terrible crimes, there's one minor problem. For every source that will happily recount his multiple murders, there is another that bluntly states the man, who some call Poland's most notorious murderer, never existed at all. So why do people remember him and even count him among the most notorious serial killers in history? Well, the common consensus among the Staniak didn't exist crowd seems to be that he's the brainchild of a true crime writer, possibly called Colin Wilson, who wrote the first account of Staniak's crimes. And apparently no one ever bothered to check his facts. Still, it's strange that it's almost as difficult to find reliable information about the fictional Staniak's origins as it is to find solid proof that he actually existed, though the fact that he's a supposedly infamous killer and doesn't even have his own Wikipedia page does speak volumes. Number 3. Billy Graham's funeral. When evangelist Billy Graham died, it probably came as a surprise to many people. After all, they thought he had died about a decade ago, and people even remembered seeing his funeral on television. Billy Graham's televised funeral is one of the most prevalent cases of the Mandela effect, possibly even more common than fake memories of Nelson Mandela's death. Most people who remember seeing the funeral procession on their TV place it sometime in the 1990s or 2000s, and the opulent event and the subsequent media coverage was so breathtaking that they even remember discussing it with their friends. Of course, there was no funeral, let alone any media coverage. In fact, Graham was alive and well until his demise in 2018, and even then the funeral was a fairly modest affair, though they did offer a live stream. Mandela effect enthusiasts have offered several possible deaths that might have been mentally confused with the death of Billy Graham. This includes fellow evangelists Jerry Falwell and Fred Phelps, as well as Graham's wife Ruth, or even Charlton Heston or Ted Kennedy. Number 2. C-3PO's silver leg. Many Star Wars fans go through a very peculiar Mandela effect when they suddenly notice the Golden Protocol robot C-3PO isn't totally golden. Indeed, one of his legs is actually silver. It's enough to make some people question their programming, especially because even the toys and posters have depicted the robot as completely gold-covered. Unfortunately for conspiracy theory fans and alternate universe enthusiasts, this particular false memory has a simple explanation. Anthony Daniels, who plays the robot, explains that the leg was always silver until The Force Awakens, where C-3PO is all gold except for his left arm. However, it caused some trouble during filming since it was so bright that it would reflect the gold leg and the desert sand, making it appear golden in many shots. In fact, the silver leg was so unnoticeable that one day the production stills photographer came up to Daniels and asked why he was suddenly wearing a weird silver leg. And bear in mind, this was a man who did nothing but take pictures of the cast all day, and even he hadn't noticed. Number 1. Shazaam, the movie that doesn't exist. Shazaam is an obscure 1990s movie that featured the comedian Sinbad as a wacky genie of the lamp. A handful of people vividly remember seeing the film and can even describe its plot, which is fairly unassuming except for one fact. Sinbad has never starred in a movie called Shazaam. Indeed, no one has starred in a movie called Shazaam because there is no such movie. There is a 1996 movie called Kazam with a very similar premise and starring Shaquille O'Neal as the genie, but the Shazaam believers insist that there is a very different movie, and even remember thinking that Kazam was a blatant ripoff of Shazaam when it first came out. As for Sinbad, he originally tried to shrug off the persistent rumor and even promised on Twitter that he'll make a genie movie just so everyone can close this particular chapter on their lives. However, when he saw Shazaam referenced in an X-Files episode, he decided to stop fighting the story because it had clearly become such a powerful pop culture phenomenon that it was pointless to resist it. He has even jokingly promised to own up to the movie if a copy ever surfaces, although he does note that if that happens, he will trip out. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button and don't forget to subscribe. We've got brand new videos every day of the week. Another channel where I do brand new videos every day of the week is Today I Found Out. You'll find that linked to below. Go check it out if you want to. And as always, thank you for watching.